Okay, you guys, what's good, everyone? It's Nigel here, Trinidad Empowerment Network. So, today I want to go back to why this channel was started, why we started this channel, and what the intention was when we started this channel. And people are always asking in the comments field, wherever it may be, why does nothing change in Trinidad and Tobago? Why does nothing change in Trinidad and Tobago? And why is there so much poverty? Why is there so much crime? And yet, there is so much wealth in this country. And today I'm going to try and address those questions. Where does all the money go? Where does all the money go in Trinidad and Tobago? So let's dive into and try my best to break this down and explain exactly where the money goes and why Trinidad is in the situation it finds itself in currently. I want to do that in plain language. I want to explain to you how the system is set up, how the rich keep winning, and why no matter who's in power, and there comes a frustration, why no matter who's in power, the working class always loses. The working class, most of the people who watches these videos or my videos are the ones that always appear to be at the bottom, the one struggling, the one asking for help and not getting it from the government you voted in. And this is exactly the same thing that's happening now. You voted with all your chest expecting something to happen. And so far, if you're being honest with yourself, if you take your tribal hat off, you realize there is no real change happening in Trinidad and Tobago right now. Just be honest with yourself and accept that. So Trinidad and Tobago has a GDP of around 30 billion United States dollars, US dollars. That's over 200 billion TT dollars a year, every year. So you ask yourself, why so many people still feel like they're losing? Why so many people still feel poor in a country with a GDP of 200 billion TT dollars per year? And I'll tell you why. The wealth is not being shared evenly. This is not rocket science. The wealth is clearly not being shared evenly in Trinidad and Tobago. Because by the maths, if you do your maths with a country of 1.3 to 1.4 million people, every man, woman, and child in Trinidad should have roughly 22,000 US dollars in their pockets, doing the maths. So let's look at companies in Trinidad who operate in Trinidad, foreign companies like BP, foreign companies like Shell, foreign companies like Perenco. They have been operating in Trinidad and Tobago for decades. And if you watch my videos, or you may know that they extract our oil, they extract our gas, our natural resources, and send most of the profits back to their shareholders. Their shareholders are people who own the companies, essentially. Own BP, own Shell. They operate for profit. For their shareholders. So BP alone made over 13.8 billion US dollars in profits alone in just 1 year. 13.8 in profit alone, billion dollars. And yet, Trinidad only gets about 2 to 3% in royalties and taxes from BP. That's not development. That is not development, that's economic colonization. So when I talk about taxing the rich, this is who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the gentleman who owned, or the woman that owned 100,000 or 200,000 TT dollars. Whatever richness is in Trinidad. Someone that owns $1 million in Trinidad. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about these multi-billion pound company, or dollar, these multi-billion dollar companies that operate in Trinidad and Tobago. So whilst the rich and these massive corporations continues to dodge taxes and use loopholes You pay 12.5% VAT on almost everything you buy in Trinidad. The working class pays PAYE, pay as you earn, property tax, NIS, yet can barely make ends meet at the end of the month. You are taxed every time the government decides to raise raise money for the country. The first people they look at is a working class. Your tax goes up. Meanwhile, the top 1% in Trinidad control more wealth. They control more wealth than the bottom 50% combined. The top 1% controls more wealth than the bottom 50% combined. Let that sink into your head. So when I talk about taxing the wealth, this is who I'm talking about. And this is what I do not see any government policy aligning with, irregardless of who's in charge in Trinidad and Tobago, whether it be the UNC, the PNM, or whoever. So the government in Trinidad and Tobago, the government spends billions on contracts. They overpaid consultants. Mismanagement goes on. State resources, money is overspent and wasted, and still we can't seem to fix basic things like healthcare or education or fix the roads. You see it all the time. People complaining about the healthcare system, how bad the road is in Trinidad and Tobago, etc., etc. Yet billions are spent on these things yearly. Mismanagement. In 2024, Trinidad spent 5.2 billion on national security. 5.2 billion in national security. But what, you ask yourself, what about job creation? What about building communities? Where is the investment in that? All we tend to see is short-term fixes. 5.2 billion on national security. What has that gained us? And I always say to you, if you watch my videos, if you want to create wealth in a country, if you want to create wealth, you create jobs. You invest in communities. You create jobs. Not just CPEP jobs. You create actual jobs. You create businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurs. You push entrepreneurship. You give small businesses at the core of most rich developed countries worldwide. Small businesses. And that's pushed by the government. So let's be real. Whether it's the UNC or the PNM, nothing appears to change in Trinidad because they are both mismanaging the same broken system. They're both presiding over the same broken system with no real policy changes. We see no real policy changes. They don't tax the wealth. They do not tax the wealth in Trinidad. They don't challenge big corporation, BP, Shell, Perenco. They just come in and do what they want in our country. And it appears they don't care about creating real equality. They do not care about creating real equality in Trinidad because if they were, this is how they should tackle it. You cannot afford for these multi-billion-dollar conglomerates to operate in Trinidad and Tobago almost tax-free, paying 2 to 3% tax. This is where the wealth is going. They're taking the money, literally taking our money out of our country and walking away scot-free. And no one's doing anything about it. There is no policy to change anything. And it continues year in, year out. And what does that lead to? Sky-high crime, communities abandoned, young men with no opportunities and women, police overwhelmed, and people turn into crime out of what? Desperation. Inequality drives crime. Inequality drives crime. That's a proven fact. Not just in Trinidad, that's worldwide. Inequality is the biggest driver of crime. That is a proven fact, research done worldwide. We cannot hide from it. We cannot run away from it. And until we address inequality, nothing changes. So this idea that we're going to do stand your ground or state of emergency for another 3 months, stand your ground, none of that addresses the core of the problem we face in Trinidad. None of that addresses a real issue. It's just a temporary plaster we're putting over this cut that keeps bleeding out over and over again. It doesn't address the root cause. So if we want real change, we need to tax wealth. We need to tax wealth, and we need to do it now. Not just wages, not just VAT, but real wealth. The multi-billion-pound companies, the multi-millionaires in Trinidad, the importers of food into our country need to be taxed sufficiently. We need to expose how the system works. Because right now, the rich pay consultants and they pay lobbyists to write their own rules whilst you struggle to feed your family. And this will continue. I told you at the very beginning, doesn't matter who comes back, whether the PNM had won this election or the UNC had won this election, I made the prediction that it was going to be worse under the UNC because they followed the Donald Trump strategy. They follow this right-wing, far-right, nonsense capitalist strategy Donald Trump does. They've got no intention of taxing the wealth in Trinidad and Tobago. None. No intention. Everything's about state of emergency. They've got no ideas, no plans. State of emergencies. I mean, talking about running a state of emergency for a further 3 months, like that's going to fix the problems in Trinidad and Tobago. It's not going to fix anything. It's not going to fix the problems. So every respected economist in the world, people like Richard Wolff or Gary Stevenson have been saying this for years. If you don't tax the rich, the system collapses. And I feel like when you talk about taxing the rich, people are talking about someone who's got, $200,000 or $1 million. That's not who I'm talking about. Trinidad right now, I would say, is collapsing. And not because we're lazy. It's not because we lack resources, but because the people at the top are hoarding all of the wealth. The people at the top are hoarding all of the wealth, and the government who are in place to do something about it do nothing about it. And this is a problem we face. So I'm going to be sat here talking about the same thing over and over again like a stock record. But the only way we can hold them to account is if we all come together, stop this tribal nonsense, stop them versus us, and realize they're the ones taking you for granted. This is why I created this channel. And this is what I wanted to expose when I created this channel. To educate as best as I can, to expose, and of course, most of all, to empower. But all I find is this. You find that it's a tug of war. It's them versus you versus them. And who's winning? Who's winning whilst we're fighting each other? The people at the top. The people at the top. You need to screw your head on, some of you people. Respectfully. If you want to fix this country, it starts with understanding how the system works. It starts with understanding how the system works, and then and only then we could demand better. So I'm not going to get bored of saying this. I'm not going to get tired of saying this. Even if you do, we must tax wealth. We must challenge the elite. And we must make our voices too loud to ignore. And this is what we must do, and we must do it now. So if you agree with my message, please like, please comment, please share, and please subscribe. Let's build a movement that's strong enough to hold these people accountable. It's a numbers game here. It's a complete numbers game. If we build big enough, then they will eventually, they'd have to hear us. They cannot ignore us. They cannot ignore us. So that's why I created this channel. I hope you resonate with what I have to say. As we continue to grow, let's get to 10K. Let's keep building. Let's get to 100K eventually. That's the plan. Let's get to 200. Let's get to 1 million. And that way, we cannot be ignored. I'll see you guys on my next video. For now, much love. God bless. Take care. Peace.